This is lesson 1-3, properties of operations. So first, a property is a rule that can be made because numbers act in a certain way when we put them with a particular operation. Just a reminder to you of what the four operations are of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We call those arithmetic operations. These properties are absolutely things that you must memorize if you haven't already. For me, I would write each property and maybe an example 5 to 10 times over the next few days so that I have them in my head and I know why I can use them. A lot of Regents questions will suggest that you need to not only show what you can do, but explain why. And the explanation, quite frankly, is your knowledge of the properties. We'll start with the commutative property. And the commutative property states that we can switch the order of the numbers and we get the same answer. Here's an example of the commutative property of addition. 2 plus 4 is also equal to 4 plus 2 because both sides are equal to 6. This also works with multiplication. The commutative property does not work with subtraction or division. The associative property means that we can group numbers differently and still get the same answer. For example, if we have 3 numbers in a row, 2 times 4 times 2, and we have them grouped differently, as you can see, the second 2 numbers have a set of parentheses around them on the left, whereas the first 2 numbers have a set of parentheses around them on the right. However, both sides, when you follow PEMDAS, still equals 16. This is also a property that only works for addition and multiplication. The associative property will not work for subtraction or division. The distributive property works only for multiplication. The distributive property means we take what is on the outside of the parentheses and multiply it by each part inside the parentheses. You should be absolutely stressing the word each in this definition. The most common mistake when dealing with a distributive property is that people forget to do it to every single part of what's inside the parentheses. A way to remember that is to draw arrows as if this person were a male person and delivering the mail to everyone in the neighborhood. You have to deliver the mail as a male person to everyone in the neighborhood or you get fired. If you don't deliver the 4, in this case, to everyone, 2 and the 1, inside the parentheses, you will lose points. It is an extremely common mistake when solving equations and doing other sorts of mathematical operations. The identity property means that we perform an operation on a certain number or variable, and we get the same number in return. This happens in all 4 operations. For example, with addition and subtraction for that matter, adding 0 or subtracting 0 gives us the same number in return. Because 0 is the number that we add or subtract to get the same thing, we call 0 the identity element for addition and subtraction. For multiplication and division, 1 will be our identity element. When you multiply by 1 or divide by 1, you get the exact same number or variable. The inverse property is arguably the most difficult of all the properties to understand. The inverse property means we're going to perform an operation to any number or variable to get the identity element. So this time we want our identity element to be the answer. For example, if I want 0 to be my answer when I have 4, what do I add to 4 to get to 0? The answer is its opposite, or its additive identity, which in this case is -4. When I'm working with multiplication or division, the reciprocal meaning make it a fraction and flip it, is the inverse of the number. Finally, the last property that we're going to discuss is the zero property, and this is only for multiplication. This is something you've probably been drilled into your head since you started learning multiplication. And that is, when any number is multiplied by zero, the answer will always be zero, no matter how big or small, variable or numerical. For example, 1,234,567 times 0 is equal to 0. Let's play a little game. Write down all of the examples, and then to the right of them, see if you can name the property that's being illustrated with the example. Pause the video at this point to give yourself a chance to try it on your own. So 2 plus 3 equal to 3 plus 2 is an example of the commutative property. The next one is an example of the associative property. The next one is the example of the zero property, followed by an example of the identity property using multiplication. The next one is the identity property using addition. The next one is the inverse property. The next one is also the inverse property using multiplication. And finally, the last example you have to look very carefully at and notice that the parentheses didn't move, but that the numbers moved inside the parentheses. That is an example of the commutative property. Very tricky times when they sit there and try to hide properties in like that. You can't just assume because you see parentheses that it's going to be distributive or associative. If you're having any issues with any portion of this lesson, please make sure you are emailing me or consulting me in class.